Hello and welcome to This Is Apple. Looks like maybe they're out of ideas.
Well, it's okay. They could just use some generative AI to like come up with some fresh ones.
We just watched through WWDC and
What's your like initial thought? Because I will say that it was so much. As soon as it was over, I had to like sit down and kind of like process it a little bit.
it's a lot, but it's also not a lot. Here's my summary of WWDC. We've said this a lot with Apple, and this is, I think, the perfect example of their philosophy. Everything that we saw today was something that exists already. Google did it first. Microsoft did it first. Not gonna argue that whatsoever. But I think this is the perfect example of like Apple waits until they are perfectly happy with something before coming out with it.
Yeah.
Yes, of course they're gonna have the fanfare of, look, we are inventing this. Of course they are, because why wouldn't they?
They actually did kind of refer pretty much immediately that like, oh, there are like great chatbots out there. And in fact, ChatGPT is integrated into this next generation of Mac, of iPad, as well as iPhone.
Let's get the elephant out of the room first. Customizable icons, stuff like that. Let's acknowledge it. Like, let's move on. It's nice to have them, but like, let's not pretend this is like a new feature. Let's talk about the AI stuff, which I know a lot of people are gonna be like, oh, AI. I fully think that Apple has tackled it the best. I'm not saying I think Apple is the best at AI.
Yeah.
I just like, I think they have the least hard of a sell because they integrated it into pretty much everything in a way that it was, hey, here's what you're already doing. Now we added an extra button. Oh, you're in the text app? Cool. Now we got a button that says, we're gonna spell check it for you, whatever. You're in your text messages. Now you can generate a not so great meme. Whereas Windows and Google, the way they present it is like, Google's like, hey, you have to kind of like change your entire workflow. Whereas Apple's just like, you know what? Here's the extra button. And I like that better.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Sort of one of my big expectations going into this event was that, you know, Apple were kind of caught sort of unawares of how quickly AI sort of has built, which is weird because, like, you know, they've been shipping neural engines for, what, 5-6 years now. But I will give them credit. The features that they showed off today at WWDC, almost all the features were like, decent, pretty cool, okay. Nothing like was like amazing, but when you put them all together, I actually think that it's a very useful update. You've got a dozen.
Every app that you're in now has a new feature. I was kind of the same way, like, oh, how is Apple going to catch up? They low-key have been ahead of the curve the entire time. All of these features, at least on the Mac side, work on any M1 or Plus system, which is massive.
Important to note that all of the features coming to macOS Sequoia, which is the next version, are Apple Silicon exclusive. So they're actually dropping all Intel Mac support with this next generation. If you got an Intel Mac, you can list that on eBay right now for
But you should have done that about 5 years ago. If like you're even remotely interested in any of the AI stuff and you're comparing Apple to Windows now, you can get any Apple Silicon Mac, all of the features. With Windows, there's Windows PCs, there's Windows Copilot PCs, there's Windows Copilot Plus PCs. Apple just took it and they simplified it really, really well.
And so we actually, as soon as WWDC wrapped up, we were all kind of sitting around talking about it. And Kenzie had like a really good point. You know, they have a great focus on privacy. I think that's to be applauded. I think everyone appreciates some privacy theoretically. A lot of things, including the new Siri and whatnot, are running locally on device. But if you need more power than that, it can go up to the cloud. Sure, we'll give them a little bit of a pass that they're at least making the right noises, that like the stuff that goes up to the cloud is not being used for like training data. But then there's a third layer, which is for more complicated tasks. Not entirely sure how they actually decide when they call these things, but it'll pop up as saying, hey, do you want to send this to ChatGPT? In which case it's probably the most powerful version that's going to give you the most information. Because he had a great point. The thing is, you're just moving the privacy and the security from the cloud to your device. And if you still use your birthday as your passcode, someone can get your phone now and using all of this AI, have the keys to the kingdom.
If you want to embrace technology and you want to embrace the convenience, there is a level of like the privacy that has to be given up. And I don't mean like, oh, the privacy giving up should be like, oh, let's give it all to these companies. If you want a system that's like, oh, I wish there was a way to help me look through all my files.
You have to give it your files.
So like there's that side of it, but now it's like, okay, yes, everything's on your device, and if your phone, it's a much more like personalized attack. It has to be one or the other, right? Like, I said this as a joke a while back, and it's becoming less and less of a joke of like a blood DNA scan of your device. How would you actually?
You should like 1,000%. And this is just good general advice, but I think especially now that more and more AI capabilities are coming to whatever device it is that you're using, take the device security seriously. There's so many things that people can do, and especially when your device is sort of holding so much information, it's now so easily centralized. You should be very sort of mindful of a lot of this kind of stuff. Everything has a trade-off, and I don't think any of these trade-offs are necessarily terrible or bad, but I think it's stuff that you should be mindful of. Now, a couple of other things that are sort of related to this. It's also coming to M1 and newer iPads, which is a decent chunk of iPads right now, but it is only coming to the iPhone 15 Pro and newer. And a big reason for this is because running these things locally on device is very intensive, not only when it comes to the NPU, but also when it comes to memory. So I think a big part of this is there going to be a downside to having all of this Apple Intelligence running in the background? You know, in talking with Microsoft when it comes to the Copilot Plus PCs, all of those PCs ship with a minimum of 16 gigs of RAM. And I'll be honest with you, 32 gigs is actually not unreasonable because those AI models are large. All of the devices that we're talking about here, these are all 8 gigs of RAM plus, right? So the iPhone 15 Pro has 8 gigs of RAM, M1, 2, 3, 4 all have 8 gigs of RAM. How much of a performance penalty are you going to have here? I'm sure they've optimized it well, but from my understanding, this stuff is very memory intensive because my understanding is that ChatGPT only shows up for Siri requests that are more complicated and the writing tools. Pretty much anywhere in macOS, iPhone, iPad, you can just select text. It will give you the option to proofread it, or you can send it out to GPT to kind of give it a little bit more of a thorough like rewrite or whatever. And that's one of the things I'm surprised like we haven't seen in Windows, because like that feels like the Copilot button kind of does something somewhat similar, but it's like it takes a couple steps.
It takes extra steps, and that's
select it.
That's
boom, you're done.
Like coming back to my point of like, I think Apple just did it better.
But wait, Matt, you're missing the most important thing here. How else am I gonna do my what do they call this stupid emoji
Genmojis?
Genmojis. This is what I need my AI capability for, is to make myself a cool emoji as a race car driver. Whatever. So a couple of other things.
Let's talk about what we thought would never come out, and that's calculator on iPad.
Actually, the coolest part of the whole WWDC.
On the surface, it's a calculator app. It is one of the most powerful mathematical tools.
This whole update was designed for cheaters. And if you want to cheat on your math, you just write it out and it'll automatically do it. If you want to cheat on people in your life, you can hide specific apps.
This is a super powerful app that is now built in for free into the OS. That's what I feel like a lot of people lose when they're talking about Apple products. It's not just the device you're buying. The fact that all of this AI stuff is just added into these devices. That is the value proposition.
Agreed. I know that we always every year complain about how we want more for the iPad, That and the actual handwriting stuff and making it sort of neater and sort of making it a little bit easier. It actually is really quite powerful. On top of that, I think one of the other things that was cool was the ability for you to screen mirror your iPhone to the Mac. We've for many years speculated that there would be touchscreen Macs at some point. And watching this keynote, I was like, man, they're getting ready for it. Because you can now, without even touching your phone, open up your iPhone, you can go through all the apps, basically use it just like anything else. Now, I will say that there is a somewhat similar feature when it comes to Android and Windows. It's fine. I find that it's a very big battery drain. I'm curious to see how well this works, but this really leverages stuff like the touchpad. That's a good feature. Like I'm surprised that like this kind of took a while to sort of get here, but like I could see using this on a really regular basis. If I'm like posting to Instagram, I know that like I've just finished doing my edit. I can literally just open my phone as the app, drag it in, use my keyboard to type it out, post it.
I'm gonna sound like a broken record this whole video. Yes, these things already existed on other platforms, but they refined it and made it work. The seamlessness that these things tend to work. It's a level of refinement that I'm just really appreciating from this event. Every individual feature, super underwhelming. I've mentioned it multiple times. I don't give a shit about customization on my phone. I have not changed my wallpaper in probably 15 years. The big letdown was almost next to nothing for Vision OS.
I like the fact that your Mac screen can be super duper big, and same thing, like very minimal updates to like the Apple Watch. In fact, maybe there'll be a updated version of the watch later this year.
The Apple Humane pin is just...
Well, that's kind of what we got here. You know, when you talk about like Humane, you talk about Rabbit, they rushed out because they knew that this stuff was coming.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely what we've seen. Here's the only downside to this. Yes, it's really easy to make fun of them for trying to pretend that moving your app icons around is like some revolutionary feature. Ultimately, the big story here, I don't think that any one of the individual things they showed was life-changing and incredible. But unlike what we've seen with Windows, which is a couple of features and then that's it really, or with Android, which is like Gemini in the cloud, kind of cool, but not like fully baked. These are actually a bunch of legitimately useful features that are going to be available on your device, even if you only use a couple of them here and there. Like one of the things I think is going to be the most useful, using Apple Intelligence to summarize things like your notifications. All these individual little things here and there are adding up to me for something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. I went into this being very pessimistic about what they were going to show. I was like, oh, it's going to be a little bit of this, a couple features. But like, unlike everyone else who are just launching one feature, two features, three feature, they launch like a dozen. If you use even a couple of them every day, I think that is worthwhile as an upgrade if you've got a device that can run it. And I think that's the biggest downside here. All these cool iPhone features are only coming to people with an iPhone 15 Pro. That is a limited selection of people who own iPhones.
But
that's a problem.
Yes, but it's way more MacBooks than there's PCs out in the world that have this compatibility.
That is true, because Copilot Plus, you need to buy a brand new system today.
So it's just a different end of the spectrum there.
Yeah, well, because what Google have done with Android is, while there's a couple of things that run on a device, almost all of it is relying on Gemini.
The one thing that I don't know how I feel about, I think I appreciate it on the Apple side. It's like, do you want to send this to the cloud? Do you want to send this to ChatGPT? It's treating it individually on a case-by-case basis, which I like that it's not just a blanket opt in, opt out. Because the example they show is like, hey, I have these ingredients in my fridge. What should I have for dinner? And it's like, hey, do you want to send this to ChatGPT?
Yeah.
Sure, I would. But like, I don't want to say like, hey, how do I do my taxes? Like, do you want to send your tax form? It's not like a hidden setting that I have to go in and like customize everything myself. I think that's a very user-friendly way to do it.
I'm really curious on what it's like to live with these things versus the theoretical. The developer beta is live right now. The public beta will be live in July. I will give a word of warning that from my understanding of these features, they're a little half-baked at the moment. That being said, I'm excited to spend some time with it. And there was a lot of other stuff that we don't have time to talk about today, like improvements to the game porting toolkit, improvements to like game mode. If I was gonna just sum it up, it's easy to write off some of this stuff as gimmicky. But I think that Apple actually did a pretty good job here of balancing what they're good at, which is, trying to give you a good privacy message and trying to, make it Apple Intelligence instead of AI. And while time will tell how well these things actually work and how useful they are and how much of this stuff is going to be slow or how much of it's going to, cause problems or crash or, you're going to run out of RAM on your phone, blah, blah. Like, obviously, we need to spend some time with it. But I'm significantly more impressed with what they showed than I thought I was going to be. And I'm legitimately excited to see how much of this stuff gets really taken advantage of on a daily basis. Because I feel like once you get used to some of this stuff, you're going to really be even more stuck into that Apple ecosystem, which, for good or bad, it is what it is.
Like, follow, subscribe, let us know how you'll never buy an Apple product ever again. We'll catch you in the next one.